The concept is different in that the thing I'd want to start with, if you go to the guitar source, really what it is speakers. But yeah, pull up PA Live or PA Tight. So you see there's a pair of old Yuri speakers in the middle of the room. Back in the day, you might have a whole bunch of gobos around stuff and maybe you close mic'd and you realize I want some more room sound. So the studio trick would be what I call remiking, where you blast the room with a pair of drivers and pick it up with a couple other mics to get more room sound, whether it's for the drums or some string section or what have you. That's still a common studio trick. What Sound City Studios and Ocean Way aim to do is give you that studio trick with a million variations and with some additional technology that kind of pushes it beyond just a simple remiking of the room. Let's say you are in a bedroom and you want to record some real drums and you don't have a very impressive sounding room. You're probably going to close mic everything and apply reverb to it just to give it a little bit more ambience. Sound Studio's job is to give you the sound of that studio rather than some generic reverb. So again, kind of like the chambers, it's a very specific sound that is complementary, especially to rock. But yeah, the room itself, again, it's not really an ideally built studio. It's a trapezoid shape. It's got sort of like asymmetries to it and some bass buildup to it, but it is also the sound of rock and roll from all the records we've heard that were made in this room, right? And as we like to say, a lot of things are kind of warts and all. It's not up to us to try to fix things, whether it's that chamber that Pop Gordy built with no knowledge of how a chamber should be built, or this room, which was built probably by people that weren't studio designers. That's kind of the Dave Grohl setup right there. It's got the 24-inch kick and the 18-inch floor tom and the big old mount tom, and that's right where the drums sat. One of the things I wanted to mention is radiation. So a speaker radiates out, right? Just one direction, and that's super useful and cool. But what we're trying to do here is give you the radiation pattern of each of the sources, and that's why there's all these different source options. So drums, it's really a collection of instruments that all radiate in different ways. So what we're trying to do is give you the way that drum set hits the room. It's not just firing towards the mics on the other end of the room, right? It's firing in an omnidirectional way, really. And so if you go to acoustic and go to the grand piano, you know that a grand piano fires up and down mostly. It fires every which way, but most of the energy is going this way. So what we've done is replicated the energy patterns of these specific sources. So it's just another layer of realism to what really happens physically in this room. The other thing is the piano was almost always in this corner. So we're giving you classic setups from that studio, whether it's the microphone selections, the mic positions, but also the position of the instrument in the room. In Ivory, my recommendation would be to turn off any of their own either artificial reverb or room mics. Pull up piano. The most important thing to really get something that sounds like Sound City is to leave it right where you have it in remic mode. Do a quick hover over that for the tooltips. So there's source select, and then if you go to the right of it, there's mode select. And now hover over to remic. Remic entirely replaces your recordings with the studio's complete room and microphone characteristics. Remic mode retains the source to mic direct path component. What that is talking about is, generally if you're running an artificial reverb, you're taking your entire source and putting it through this new system, but it doesn't have a lot of a direct component. So that direct component is a really important sonic fingerprint of that microphone and that interaction between source and microphone. So there's two ways to use this product, but I think the most interesting and significant way to use it is in remic mode. So there's three mic pairs. So there's close, room one, and room two. So turn off close temporarily. Then now you're listening to just a pair of far mics. If you wanted to, you could drag that mic closer to or further away from the piano. You just grab the mic stand itself. So listen to it at its furthest, and then drag it all the way up. Ideally, it's sounding like what it would sound like if you drag that mic around in the room. And then again, if you turn that mic off and go back to close, it's like the overheads. You can raise the mic stands a little bit and get a little bit more air on it. So that's the dynamic part of what we're discussing. So there are, you know how we were talking about in Hitsville, there's like the default position. That's where the mics actually were when we did the capture. And then through algorithmic techniques, we're able to replicate the sound of moving those mics around in the room. And then, we're back to remic and reverb. So if you wanted to use this room as a straight reverb, what reverb mode does is it artificially omits the direct component, the signal that's going from the source to the mic. So you can do that digitally, go beyond reality. The thing that's going to give you the most sort of impact, in my opinion, is the remic mode. But basically what you're doing is you're replacing your recording with something entirely different. Like you're running it 100% wet. You can't run a dry wet blend under remic mode. So you kind of conceptually think about it. It's almost like you're replacing it. So back to the whole idea of putting a speaker in a room and recapturing it. You could
Hmm.
blend that in the old days, but you could have some phase issues. You might favor the new the newly recorded replaced track that captures the room, or you might use it entirely instead of that dry drum bounce down or whatever it might have been you were doing. So that's conceptually kind of the difference. But by technology, we have the ability to just omit that direct component and use it so you never even have to worry about it. If you look at things like Altiverb, they have that feature in them as well, this direct defeat button. So it's essentially the same as that feature. It isn't when it came to Hitsville chambers, because you saw
Hmm.
exactly what speakers we use. They're these old vintage speakers that they actually used to create their chamber, right? So you're actually using the original equipment in Hitsville chambers. For this, yes, there is a secret sauce component to how are we able to recreate the energy patterns of a drum set or a piano.
Right.
So again, that's another part of the dynamic room modeling, and there is a secret sauce component to that, which I can't really talk about. But I can
Um,
tell you that nobody else that I know of is trying to replicate energy patterns of sources, and nobody else I know is able to accurately and faithfully replicate what it would sound like dragging mics around in a room. So those are sort of the features that kind of go beyond what a basic impulse response snapshot can do. And beyond that, there's a whole other back end to what we're doing that gives you just a really good sounding impulse response. Okay, so there's a lot of back end to that too. And also the curated nature of what we're doing. It's like we're putting those mics right in the same spots that were tried and true in record making. One of the other things we did with this particular project, we had access to Sound City archives, like the multi-tracks, where we could actually voice, like if you go to drums and go to corner, just as another example, this is the Tom Petty setup. They would put the drums in this wood corner and they had some baffles around, kind of out there, and they kind of made a room within a room. That was their setup. And so we have Tom Petty multi-track recordings that we can compare to and go, okay, the drums are exciting the room in the same way that these multi-track recordings did. We have sonic validation that we're getting the most accurate thing. One of my colleagues actually, he's helping archive this massive tape library, one tape at a time for the owner. Suffices to say, part of the voicing of this tool specifically for the energy patterns was listening to original Sound City multitracks, which was pretty killer. I mean,
mhm.
there's also, textbook answers to the way a violin excites and radiates. There's great research done into the acoustic principles of all kinds of instruments. And that's all kind of recorded information, but that's textbook. And we wanted to have it be unique to Sound City since it's our tool to help you suspend disbelief and take your really dry or even MIDI based recordings and put them in this amazing room. If you open up, if you go to that tab to the right, just below that, go to the far right. Yeah, click on Mixer right there. Now we're getting into the console emulation part of it. So if you go to the EQ section, so go up to the icon up above, effects. So if you look at that EQ on top, it should look kind of familiar. And yeah, you can drag those modules around. See how you just were able to drag it? You can reorder equalizer and dynamics and even chamber. Hitsville is its own dedicated thing. They actually have a chamber at Sound City. So this replicates the one chamber they do have, but you
Mhm.
can select among 3 microphones and you can still adjust the amount, pre-delay, width, and it sounds great. So the decay, which is also in Hitsville, is an artificial construct as well. You know, we were talking about the ability to omit the direct component. All of our reverb chambers and rooms, if it has something like a chamber, has the ability to artificially change the decay. And that's also another common thing you'll find on general purpose IR players. So this allows you to go beyond reality and shorten the decay time of that chamber. The main thing is you got the whole package of the studio of access to the console by way of that EQ, the dynamics that are built into that console. You have the room itself, the microphones, and even access to the chamber. And that's why we say it's all the key components of that studio. You even have access to the 1176, which was had a ton of them there, and also the Dolby stuff. So Keith Olsen was really pioneering the idea of using Dolby as effects. So you got Dolby Encode, you got Dolby Air, which is that trick of taking out two of the cards of the four multiband cards. Crush is something, we basically took Dolby and turned it into a single band dynamics processor, which is one of the coolest room crush sounds I've ever heard. And then you have a gated version of Crush. And then Bus is basically the 2254 dynamics from the console. So yeah, you got a lot of options here. It's like that's why I say it's like kind of a studio all in one for whatever you want to put through it, whether it's your drums, your guitars. Yeah, you have cabinet emulations too if you go under guitar. So there's a lot of tools in it. So if you click one of those, you'll see you got a 2x12 Vox style cabinet. And then there's the 4x12. It's more of a Marshall style cabinet. You can do whatever you want for whatever source. You don't have to do everything. You can just cherry pick. And yeah, if you want to just do the old school remic trick, you can just blast it through a pair of Uris, which we found a pair of Uris up in their loft, right? So that's what they were actually using to do room miking in Sound City. So you're actually getting the old school way that they were re-exciting the room. You can put any source, you can use any source for any source. It's not like you're limited. Oh, you can only put horns through the horns, right? But the horn is replicating the dispersion pattern of an ensemble group of horns. So if you want the best realism, you probably put it in remic mode. You know, you got your horn library, you created your MIDI arrangement. Now you can just blast it through Sound City in remic mode and get the benefit of having it go through killer mics in the right positions, giving you the correct energy patterns of horns or strings. Take your MIDI based synth arrangement you came up with, or even if you yourself are a string player and you have a shitty little bedroom recording with some crappy mics, you can transform your mics and your room by way of Sound City.